All right. Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to SC Code's Mentor Monday again. It is June 1st, which is hard to believe. We have been coming to you on Mondays for a couple of months now, and it's really become one of the most exciting times each week to talk about a few new topics, to talk about what it is that our mentors are up to. And tonight we have a really exciting topic that we are going to discuss. Before I jump into that, I do want to acknowledge, we keep things here pretty light and exciting and fun. But of course, given the events of this past week, I want to acknowledge that SC Codes stands with the people of color who are part of our community. And I personally want to say to you that you belong here, that you matter to us and to the tech community and the future of this industry. So for anyone who is watching, know that we stand with you. Last week, we sent out a survey to get some information from our SC Codes community about what it is that we can provide during these Mentor Mondays that is helpful. And one of the overwhelming responses we received was that folks really want to know about how to get into development. Over 68% of the respondents to our survey chose this as the number one topic they want to talk about. So tonight we have a couple of developers here who are going to discuss that very thing. It's good to see you guys, by the way. Emily, we've got Shayla, we've got Scott, and there's several others are joining us as well. And y'all don't forget to post your comments and questions as we are chatting, and I will pass those along to our guests. So let me get those guests on screen for us. Hold on one moment. And here they are. This is Seth and Thomas, and I am going to have each of them introduce themselves, but we are lucky to have two awesome developers with us tonight to share their stories and to talk a little bit about how they got into development in two different ways and give us a little more insight. So thank you both of you for being with us tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's awesome to have both of you here. And I wonder if, Seth, if you can get us started with just your story, if you'll just tell us sort of what your path looked like as you got into development.
Yeah, sure. Now you said in the talk earlier about sharing since high school, and that's kind of a long a lot of pieces there. So I'll keep that part. That'll be the abridged version. I did not find web development as a career until last year. So the part before that was, everything from, I went to college multiple times and dropped out. And I did everything from make cars to sell cars. Worked in restaurants, of course. I did a lot of stuff. There was a time period where my wife and I, with our son, we have two kids now, but just the son was around at the time, where we both worked remotely and we traveled full time and lived in a camper for a while. And that was cool. But what I was doing at the time, while it was lucrative, you had to kind of sell your soul. It was not a good industry. So just bouncing around from job to job until I was in a place where I was at restaurant management in Greenville, South Carolina, with a great company. Like, they are phenomenal. And I wouldn't say disparaging things about them. What I will say is that it came to a crossroads for me personally, where I had to figure out if I could stand the late nights, long weekends, and if my family could stand that as well. Just the not being able to see kids at night, not being able to, go to different things on the weekends and stuff like that. And came to a decision that it wasn't, even though I enjoyed it, it was not something that we could keep up long term, just as a family. So I talked to a few friends who, I have a friend, Tyler, he went through the Iron Yard, and he told me he told me that he went through the Iron Yard and it was great, but he knew that they had closed down, so he didn't know about other options. And then I had a friend who was self-taught, who actually went to the original SC Codes meetups at the Greenville Library. I don't know if they're original, but original to the area at least, But then he told me that he was like, "Oh, I think they're doing Carolina Code School." So I quit my job. We figured out it is getting, and we can talk about that more later, but, I quit my job and committed full time to the Carolina Code School immersive boot camp. So I started, actually, my daughter was born the third day of my foundations class. Yeah, so it was pretty nuts for a minute. And we had just decided, me and my wife had, it wasn't a secret that she was pregnant at that point, So we had conversations leading up to it about whether I should do that cohort or wait for the following. And we just decided it was a good time for us. We had a lot of family help in the area, so we were very fortunate in that regard. But did the immersive program, went through the career services afterwards, got hooked up with an internship in Greenville with a great company called Earnest. And then after that, I got my current job with a company called Juice Analytics. So I've been here, July 29th will be a year.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
That's kind of the story, the path.
Yeah. And your current title is?
Data application developer.
Yeah. Did you know what that was a year ago?
No. I still don't know what it is. I had no idea. I came into it, and that's a good point. I came into it knowing nothing. I didn't know the difference between Java and JavaScript. I asked a question that a lot of people ask out of the gate. What's the difference? Are they the same thing? Like if you just have this top level view, you're like, well, the word Java is in both, so they should be the same thing. Right. That's where I was in November of 2018.
Yeah.
And then here we are now.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that, Seth. And I'll add a couple of pieces of information just for our viewers who may not be aware. So the Iron Yard you mentioned was a code school that was in South Carolina and then shut down. The SC Codes kind of pilot program you mentioned in Greenville, very similar to what we offer now. Of course, our library partners are mostly closed, so we are not currently going through cohorts in person, although we have our virtual cohort that is coming up later this month, which is exciting. But yes, we had folks who were kind of in a cohort style class going through and learning really some of the basic foundational. I think they were using Free Code Camp for that first couple classes, and then we realized, hey, this model is actually pretty cool as far as helping kind of remove barriers to learning for people who really do have that learning style that is much easier for many of us to learn if we've got that accountability and have kind of a group of folks to go through class with. And so we really kind of took that model and said, hey, there's something here. Let's really build on that. So so Seth's you're our non-traditional path example.
Yes.
And I know that a lot of folks who are watching with us and who are part of these conversations are, where you were a year and a half ago, a little bit over a year ago, where they don't have a ton of information, but they know that this is something they may be interested in, and they're kind of looking for that direction of like, where do I turn? So thank you for sharing your story, and we'll definitely get more into it here in a couple minutes. Thomas, will you jump in now?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My background is a bit more like traditional, but with a little bit of a twist. So in high school, I actually grew up in Oregon. So when I was in high school out there wasn't a whole lot to do. And I got really into computers, and the easiest way to program, because at the time I was doing like Visual Basic 6, the easier thing was to learn how to program for the web. So it started out with HTML, CSS, and then I started just wanting more and more to do, and found PHP and sort of the LAMP stack. And so I was doing that through high school, just self-taught, just finding it interesting and wanting to learn more. And then I went to college at Oregon State University, and I ended up doing electrical engineering when I was there. So it was a combined electrical and computer engineering program. And I got my bachelor's degree and then my master's degree in that. So then after college, I was working for a big Silicon Valley tech company doing hardware engineering. So making the circuits that are inside, laptops and those type of devices, which honestly, when you boil it down, is mostly coding. You're not actually soldering resistors and doing that type of thing anymore. You're pretty much just writing code that describes all of the hardware. So I did that for 5 years, and I was based out of Portland, Oregon, with quite a few trips back and forth to the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. But my wife's job actually brought me out here. I'm now in Charleston, South Carolina, and that was just about 3 years ago now. And it was very good timing. I was looking to learn how to improve my software skills. I'd done some web development while I was at my hardware job, mostly like recording data and simple CRUD type app. But I was kind of keeping it going, like keeping my skills going a little bit, but not a lot. And I basically decided that I really would rather spend my time learning how to write good software. I felt like that was something that was missing from the role I was in. So I made the switch to a full-time web development company here in Charleston. And I was there for a year, and now I'm at my current company, which is not based in Charleston, but it's based out of Santa Monica, California. But there's a small office here. So for the past 3 years, I've kind of dove feet first back into web development, and I'm working with C# and Ruby, Ruby on Rails, and HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So I've definitely had a traditional background in the sense that I did a 4-year degree, and then just kind of got my job after college and went about it. But then I decided, I think I'd like to take at least some type of a right turn, something, and change things up a little bit and go back to web development. And I really have enjoyed it ever since. I feel like I've become a much, much better coder than I was when I was a hardware engineer.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah,
so I've got a couple of other questions, but I do want to remind our viewers that Seth and Thomas are taking questions, and I've got a couple coming in, but as you guys have questions, please do put those over in the comment box. I think this is Shayla asked, did the company teach you software development? And I'm going to say, I think that's for Thomas, which is totally one of the questions I was going to ask about for both of you. We'll start with you, Thomas, but when you were looking at kind of making this switch, or whenever you are in a place where you want to kind of keep those skills fresh, like you mentioned, like, how do you do that? Did the company do that with you, or did you just do it all by yourself? And how do you know where to go and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So I think a theme throughout all stages from high school to college to jobs, internships, both in hardware and in software, the more self-motivated I've been, the better off I've done. It's not to say that the companies themselves haven't been willing to do training and people who are at the companies haven't been willing to help, but my ability to be a self-starter, if you will, like push for that, like ask for it, look up resources and sort of try my hardest to get that knowledge has really helped me. When I made the switch, there was no training program for that. So I was able to apply and go through interviews with the knowledge that I had from both. It's sort of a combination of things. There was my background in prior years from web development. There was the software skills I learned on the job with my hardware company. And then there was also me frantically researching and trying to fill the holes I felt like I had in my own knowledge base. So the ways that I did that, I really like to read technical books. I might be a little weird that way, but I sort of enjoy them. So I'd always ask people like, hey, do you have a book you would recommend? Like, I really want to know more about software development. And then from that, you'll get a few recommendations and kind of go off from there. I've also watched courses in Udemy or like Coursera, something like that, one of those online learning, and it might be as simple as pick something that sounds interesting and just try and stick with it. And you get a little bit of knowledge and then that'll kind of spark a question like, oh, he mentioned, some other technology I'm not really aware of and, off and running on that. So yeah, it's definitely not waiting for someone to come and teach you, but showing that you're interested and trying as much as you can, which obviously is very difficult to push for getting that knowledge and asking for help from people, to help you, give you leads or books or advice or, help.
Yes, such good stuff. And Thomas, just on my screen, you're a little frozen. You guys too,
Cool.
or no? I still hear you great, so maybe it's just me.
He's moving for me, but I don't know.
Awesome. So Shayla had a kind of follow-up question, and Seth, you may actually be able to answer this too. I think you went through this. She's asking, so they don't really mind if you don't know everything at the time you're hired and you're able to learn as you go. I think the smiles say it all.
Yeah, I just know how to use Google a lot better than I used to. It's especially with I guess junior level jobs, things like that. They do not, at least in my experience, they do not expect you to know everything. They just expect you to want to, and they want to see that you know how to learn. Like they want to see that you have the drive, and they want to see that you can logic through the problems, and then they can teach you, or you can teach yourself along the way, the syntax and the extra stuff. That's my case with my current job. I ask 1 million questions every day. I'm sure everyone hates me, but I ask a lot of questions, and I don't, there was a point where, I had to come to terms with the fact that that's just how it's going to be. Don't feel guilty about it. Don't feel embarrassed about it. Like you don't know what you don't know. And if you just show, at least in my position, if you just show that you want to learn it, then there's always at least one person who's like, well, let me teach you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. I hear that so often that people will say like, well, I don't know everything. And do they expect me to know everything? And no one knows everything at all.
Right.
And everyone had to learn all the things they know at some point. And it's more about your ability to show that you're willing to learn and that you're capable of, taking information you're given and start to process it into something, right. And not just, give up or say, I don't know. And that's huge. But yeah, no one knows everything. And I've had to learn so many different things on the job as we go. That's not a deterrent from getting into coding.
Yeah, I would actually add to that, that it really doesn't matter if you're going the traditional route, the non-traditional route, self-taught. The technology changes so quickly that, if you have a computer science degree, that's awesome. And also in 5 years that you're likely going to be working on stuff that didn't exist when you were getting that degree. So I agree that for everyone that I work with and talk to, it seems like, that drive and that kind of ability to go and figure stuff out is a really, really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Gosh, lots of good questions. Y'all keep them coming. Emily from Aiken wants to know what would be a good entry-level position to get into development, and wants to know if most people start as interns. I think that's a great question, especially because what I see in South Carolina is there is a plethora of names for these positions that, it's not super easy to know unless you go Google a ton of different versions of entry-level development positions. And also a lot of positions don't necessarily make it clear that they are open to entry level. So I'd love to get y'all's thoughts on that.
You wanna take this part, Thomas, or?
Sure, I can start us off.
Cool.
I can speak from my experience that I did a number of internships along the way. So I was in school, so it was it set itself up very well for that, for coming out and doing an internship in the summer. So by the time I graduated, I at least had a few internships, which I think was very beneficial. I got to see that things were different in the real world than they were in school, for sure. But also, and this goes back to what you were saying about how things move so quickly. It was nice to have a little experience, but you still were kind of hitting the ground running, like from day one at the next position you were starting. In terms of, since I've been in the software development world in South Carolina, and we've had a number of junior developers or entry-level positions, that I've worked with since I've been here. And I guess I don't know how to answer the best question. I think that getting into a position where you're going to have an opportunity to work on real things and work with people that you're excited to work with is very important. I'm sure there's a number of entry-level positions at all kinds of companies, and they vary wildly. And part of the problem is you may not know that until you actually get into one to see what you're getting into. But to me, it goes a lot to the people that you work with, because those are the people that are going to teach you the most, I would say. If you have the drive to learn and you can pair that with some people who are willing to teach you and help you and take you under your wing might be one phrase for it, but that's huge, because they can help, very quickly give you knowledge that would take you a lot longer to find out on your own.
Yeah.
So, just keep that in mind. If, like, for example, if you're interviewing to get your first position, try and ask, like, who would I be working with, and ask them about their background and, what they like about working with a junior developer. Because that's just very important.
Yeah, to add to that, with my experience, and I guess the experience of those around me, so other graduates from my cohort and following cohorts, things like that. It varies. I know that I and a couple of other people from my cohort took internships, honestly, because we just had a certain style that we wanted to work with, and that's something that, at least in my case, I was very fortunate to where I didn't need to apply to every. Well, I did apply to every position that I saw, really, for like interview help and stuff, but I didn't have to. I wasn't in a position where I felt forced to take something that I wasn't comfortable with. And then, so working with Ernest with that internship, it just ticked a few boxes for me. I was able to have a couple of people, so Andrew Elster, Jonathan Thompson, a few other people who did kind of provide that. I was working in a different language than I worked with in my cohort. We were doing Elixir, which is a totally different, not only a different language, but a different style of programming than I had done with Python. And I just knew, after talking with Andrew and Daniel Jeffords, they were like, it seemed like a good fit for knowing that I could go in and ask questions, and knowing that I could go in and honestly get another check on my resume for another language that I have a base in, something like that, just a resume builder. But I know plenty of people who went straight into a role as a junior developer at great companies. So it just depends on, I think, I definitely don't think it's a necessary thing, but it's something that I would do again in a heartbeat in the same order that I did it. It was very rewarding.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth, for sharing that. So Shayla's got a couple more questions. So she's 40 with a family and getting her associate's degree in computer tech, which is awesome. Congrats on working hard on that. So she's looking for suggestions on kind of for her and in her situation, jobs that she should look for. She also has this question around internships or positions that are requiring a bachelor's degree, which she's seeing a bunch. She's in Columbia, so that's kind of where she's looking. So, going that kind of non-traditional path. Do you guys have suggestions for her on what about these positions that are posted that require a bachelor's degree, and kind of places that she should be looking, or how she might be able to find some of these positions?
I'll take this one first and then pass it off. I don't have a ton to say except for the fact or the idea that you should apply no matter what. They are just going to say no. It's like that's the worst thing that can happen is you don't get a call about the job. The best thing that can happen is that someone in HR who doesn't really know anything about the position, honestly, just copy and pasted a template for a similar position, for a job. So apply for whatever, if the job sounds interesting. If you think that you can fulfill the job and the role of the job, then I would apply even if you don't meet the qualifications. Obviously, you don't want to get into a position where somehow you sneak through the cracks and now you're in a job that, you can't fulfill. But if you, like with the career services at Code School, they were like, if it says up to like 3 years, go ahead and apply. And the worst that can happen is that they don't give you a call back. Same with the bachelor's. Most, from what I've learned, job descriptions for this industry at least are not hard and fast as far as the descriptions on, honestly, your role, what you'll be doing is not necessarily what you're actually going to be doing. So you need to ask a lot of questions there, but also it's not going to be, they're not necessarily looking for all of those boxes to be checked.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. There's always many more requirements that are actually, they'd like to have them more than their requirements. And I agree with Seth that the worst that can happen is you apply for a position and they say, we're looking to go in a different direction, or, we're not interested. And, that may not be the outcome that you want, but it certainly doesn't hurt to try. The other thing I might say is that, there are places, the company I started working with here in Charleston when I first moved here, they had a engineering director who was very passionate about finding people who'd worked in code schools and mentoring them and coaching them. And so sometimes it can help just to apply to a position and they say, well, we don't really think you would necessarily be the best fit for this role, but, we might have something coming up, or, I'd be interested in talking with you and we'll see what we have in the future, or something along those lines. Like it's not impossible that kind of thing would happen. And it's just good to get your name out there. Yeah. Even if they ask you for an interview, that can be still great practice. So unfortunately, I don't think anyone wants to go through the slog of all these interviews and job postings. It's not fun for anyone. But yeah, there's definitely, feel free to over apply a little bit, and the worst that can happen is that they might say, hey, that's not the direction we want to go. But, it's great to get that exposure. And, you never know, someone might be looking for that, person with exactly your resume and your fit that's very happy that you did apply.
Yeah, really good feedback. Thank you, guys. And I would really just add, too, that those of us who are part of this community with SC Codes are advocating for companies to, open up those channels with their hiring departments to make sure that, they're not necessarily requiring that some of those boxes have to be checked to look at a candidate. So that is a long road, but we are definitely working on it. Scott is asking about salary range, and I'm happy to jump in on that too, but he wants to know at what salary range could one expect as a first-time intern or entry-level position, and he said he's looking kind of for a ballpark number, and then maybe after 5 years, what kind of range are we talking about? If you guys have anything to add there, I can certainly share some numbers from South Carolina that might be helpful.
Sure.
So,
if you want to share.
So Scott, there's a great resource that comes out of CompTIA called CyberStates 2020, and I do not have it in front of me right now, but I do know that in South Carolina, if we're talking about people who work in this field in our state, we generally see an average or kind of a mean salary range in the 70 to 75,000 a year. That's median, and that does not take into account whether someone's in that first job or whether they've been doing it for 25 years. So that's a total median. So with entry level, of course, you're going to be looking at a little bit lower than that on average. With folks with a lot of experience, sometimes the number can get much higher than that. And it really is going to depend on several factors. In addition to your experience level, a lot of that is going to depend on your company. And so we've got a lot of people who are working in South Carolina and neighboring communities, neighboring states that are working for companies in California, like Thomas mentioned. So sometimes those numbers can be a little bit different, a little bit skewed perhaps. 5 years in my experience, and I'd love to hear from Thomas on this too, but that's pretty far past entry level in the software development community. So I would say, those people with 5 years of experience can easily be considering more senior level roles, and the salary that comes with that is often a bit higher than that 75,000. So that's really general for the entire state. And Scott, I know that you're in Rock Hill, so I don't know if you're looking at jobs locally right there or in other places. We've got a lot of remote workers here in South Carolina, especially right now. So anything to add on that, you guys?
I can add a little bit. I think your numbers are, that make sense to me. It's really hard to give that kind of number, really, because it does vary wildly with the location. So if you were in the Charlotte area versus someone, in Columbia, like even though they're not that far apart, they may have a large difference in salary range. But I completely agree about the 5 years. It doesn't seem like a long time. And in some industries, you're still a baby at 5 years. But in software engineering, like half of the workforce has 5 years experience or less. And that doesn't ever seem to change. So I'm very serious about that, because it's exponentially growing the number. Right. So once you hit 5 years, like you will be getting pay increases as you go. So you'll start out at that junior level, but I mean, if you stick with it and you're in there for, you can grow your salary quite a bit, fairly quickly compared with maybe a more traditional or some other industry or field.
Awesome. So it's just after 7:30, 7:34 now. We do have a couple more questions that have come in, if you guys are cool for a few more minutes.
Sure.
Sure.
Emily is Emily from Aiken. I love Emily from Aiken. That's so fun. Is asking about interviews. So for these kind of roles, what does that interview process look like? What are some ways that you can maybe prove your knowledge, your skills, especially maybe, and I'm adding this, but especially if you don't have that piece of paper that shows that you can do this. I think that's a great question.
Sure.
Seth, why don't you lead?
Yeah. I'll do my experience, because I don't have I don't have as many interviews under my belt, I guess, or at least knowing how this process works. So literally every interview that I did was different in some way. I didn't ever have everyone's very you see it on the internet or on shows, movies, whatever, the interview where they're like, you go into this room and it's almost like this interrogation room, and all that's in there is a table and a whiteboard, and they're like, you need to make this function do this thing or whatever, and they're like, it seems very intimidating. I personally never experienced that. And I think a lot of that potentially has to do with the role. Just they don't expect something like that from most companies. Don't seem to expect something like that from entry level or juniors. Who knows as you go along? I'm not there, so I wouldn't know what that interview looks like. But it's one thing that I would say: have something to show. Show and tell always works really well. Have, like with our final projects for our cohort, that's what I showed. Every interview that I had, I found a way to work it in somehow. Like just show them something that you've made. And if you have they want to know that you're actively learning and actively doing stuff. And then the interview will look like, at least in my case, how would you logic through this thing? Tell me how you would approach this problem. And then a lot of the interview is very normal, just psych evaluation style. Make sure that you're going to fit in well with the company. Make sure you fit in well with what they're already doing. And then, so I'd say the interviews, definitely prep, but don't psych yourself out. Cause they're going to, like, some of them, I got a take home project, a project to do on the spot, like a little thing, like, well, not on the spot, but they were like, send it to us within 3 hours. And then, another thing where they just like said, if you were, I can't remember the questions now, but if you were trying to get this result from a database, how would you go about it? That kind of stuff. So, prepare and have something to show. That's it. This is all I know.
That's great advice. Yeah, I hate interviewing. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I've been on a ton of interviews for internships and jobs, and I still hate it. Like, it's not a fun process at all. So, first of all, don't feel bad if you're in the process and you say this isn't fun and this is horrible, because it is. So the way that I always counter that was to try to be prepared and break things down into smaller chunks. So I think my fear with an interview is that I'm going to get in that room, like Seth was saying, with a whiteboard and, one guy and a desk, and they say, solve this problem. And, you kind of lock up and say, I don't know how to do that. Like, I can't do that. So my way to fight back against that is to break everything down into smaller and smaller pieces, and don't worry about the things that you're not sure about. So like if they fire a quiz type question at you, what's the best algorithm for such and such and such? Don't panic and think, oh, I don't know that. Stop and take a breath and then think about, like, how can I answer a little tiny piece of this? Even if that piece seems insignificant, like, well, what would be an option that maybe I know in my head isn't the best, but I think it might work? Or let me talk about things that I know that are kind of about this. And the idea is that you slowly sort of whittle your way towards a solution. And not only does that help you from like, well, and this is my personal advice, like it helps me from freezing up, but it also shows them that you're thinking. And like, as I've administered interviews, that's huge to me. Like, I can look at your resume and see what school you went to, or what, what program you went through, or all of those things, what language you say you can, write code in. But I really want to see if you can think. And I really want to see, like, if I throw a problem at you that you don't know the answer to, because that's kind of what working is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to talk to me and tell me what you're thinking and ask for help and work through the problem in little bits? Or are you just going to kind of stare and say, I don't know? So it's having those mechanisms, find whatever works for you and practice that when you're preparing. So in that prep time, but, find a way to overcome, any fear or any of those things, and find a way to make some progress. And you'll be amazed at like how much that'll show the interviewer, because I'm sure a lot of people can't answer their questions, 100%. And it's really, what are you doing in between 0 and 100 that's going to make the difference?
Yeah, that is a phenomenal point. The career support, they were like, whenever you're doing this interview, you need to be just constantly talking, just stream of consciousness type thing, where it's just, for, like you said, for that very reason, it's going to help you think to be saying it out loud, and it's going to help you start breaking it down. But when the interviewer is seeing that, okay, they are going through these steps, honestly, they are a lot more willing to help you at that point.
Sure.
They, as long as, like, if you, it's the, like, I guess, I don't know what grade they start doing. They're like, show your work with your math problem,
Yep.
Like, you need to show your work. You need to talk through it, and, feel free to, whatever they give you, write or type or whatever, just scrap whatever. Yeah, that's a great point. Just stream of consciousness, keep going, talk it out.
Yep.
Awesome advice, you guys. Thank you so much. And I would even add to that, just to be yourself and not try to be something you're not. And there are a lot of things about, folks who are in these interviews who are trying to get into development that matter, that are not technical, right? So often companies are looking for, are you a cultural fit? Are you, what did you do before that might actually be helpful to this technology we're working on? So such good advice from both of you. Thank you. A couple more questions. One, Emily was just asking about if most jobs are remote or on site. I think that's actually changing as we speak. Most jobs today are remote, whether or not they were intended to be. I think a lot of that totally, again, depends on the company. And I actually think that number is going to change even more in the coming weeks and months and become more remote. So a little bit of that remains to be seen. And then another question about contract jobs, which we have not really touched on yet tonight. I think Thomas I don't know if you've done contracts before. Seth, I don't think you've done a ton of those yet.
No. I actually have not done.
You have not?
Contracts.
Okay.
No.
Well, she's just asking if she should stay away or give it a try. If she sees something posted about a contract job that may not be full-time. I think there's a lot to consider there myself. I don't think there's really I don't think there's one answer to that. I think there's a lot of kind of, it depends, it depends on, do you know this company? How many people work there? Would you have somebody to rely on who's a developer who can help you, especially as you're new? I don't think that in general contract positions are something to stay away from, though. I think it totally could be an awesome opportunity. So that just depends, which is one of the more frustrating answers to hear. And then Scott, for our last question, unless I see any others jump through, since we're getting close on time here, Scott is asking about coding on a PC versus a Mac.
It's a hot topic in my
The
workplace.
age-old question.
Without any more specific, I mean, whatever will work for you. I personally prefer Mac, and that's what I use, mostly because it runs something that's more similar to what the code is actually running on. These days, everything runs mostly in containers or VMs that are running Linux primarily. And even Microsoft, used to be the big standout that said, no, we run C# on Windows, but even now that runs on Linux. So it's a total personal preference thing, I think. I mean, you can do anything on either machine at this point. There are almost no platform exclusives. I personally prefer the Mac.
Yeah, same. I wouldn't, like you said, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. For me personally, I found a lot more resources to help with starting out on a Mac, but but then again, that could be just because I had a Mac, so I was looking for something specific, So I have no clue. I know that I know phenomenal developers in my company, not my, but the one I work with, that use both. There's, I don't know. I work on a Mac.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have one last question, if y'all are okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, let me see who this is from. This is from Shayla. She says, I'm signed up with Pluralsight for courses. Are you familiar with that site as far as a credible source for learning on her own? And I'll let you guys take that. Of course, I always would mention SE Codes as a great starting place. But it is, not nearly as robust as some of the other communities as well. So we always encourage folks to start here, not only to kind of get that little bit of foundation of technical knowledge, but also really to connect with the community, which is, if you're going to be looking for work here in our state, here you are getting access to real people who are doing this. So Pluralsight.
I've used Pluralsight some. I got it access through some job at some point along the way. I think they're very credentialed, of good authority for learning. I put them the same as like a Udemy or something like that. I think sort of the one cautionary tale is, it is sort of what it is. They put up courses and they're rated. So check out the ratings. And if it doesn't have a very good rating, it means must not have been very helpful to some people. But I would also caution and say that, it's sort of like a book, like a library. You maybe pick it up and read it and it's like, oh, this answers all my questions and this was perfect. I'm so glad I read this. But you might read it and say, I didn't understand that at all and it didn't help me. And it kind of is what you make of it. So, try to set your expectations and see, make sure you're getting what you want out of that learning material, because, those sites are massive. Like they have so much content. It's hard to really know what to do and you can very easily get lost. And for that reason, I do love SE Codes. It has a much better program that you can go through. But those type of sites are great for learning, a particular language or framework or something like that.
Yeah, I think that. So I think that SE Codes is, to me, it's a more linear way to start out, and it's not going to be as overwhelming to people at first, where it's just, you go in and it has when you do this course, I recommend this, or, whereas, yeah, with something like the, what was it called again? The Pluralsight. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like, I'm just looking at it now. I've never used it, but it looks like it's one of those, like you said, a Udemy, where it's just going to throw you in. It's like you have your subscription, and if that's what you want, then cool. It's your job to go from there. I don't know anything about like if the because I know some of them, it's like anyone can upload a class and they just expect the rating system to work it out. I don't know if this is like that. It looks like it's probably not. But I don't know. I would lean into something like SC Codes or even, Free Code Camp or something like that to start out with. Make sure that you are interested in it, because a lot of people are interested until they do it,
Yeah.
with most things in life, yeah.
If I can add one more thing too that I just thought of. So I mentioned earlier, like I love reading technical books, and going through those. I would encourage you to try a number of different things. So whether that's Pluralsight and Udemy, like that online type of learning. There's a lot of tutorials. Like if you're interested in a particular framework, like Ruby on Rails has fantastic tutorials, for example. And most like JavaScript frameworks have a great tutorial. There's blogs, dev.to and Medium. There's books, paper books. There's YouTube channels. So there's a ton of different ways you can get knowledge. And I would just encourage you to try them. And one of them hopefully will stick out to you as being more effective, and then, sink into that a little bit more. And if Pluralsight is the one that you find works the best for you, then by all means, it's a great platform. It's just not might be for everyone.
Yeah. I would add to that, I think we're kind of talking about two things. One is when you are new and you're sort of dabbling and you're just kind of interested and you want to jump in and out and kind of see, what's out there. The other is if you begin to formulate a goal for yourself, whether that is, I know that I am going to be a person who needs to find a job in Columbia, South Carolina, doing software development. I would really encourage you to start talking to the people who are doing that in Columbia. One way we try to help encourage that is through our Slack channel, which I will also throw into the comments here for y'all. But we actually have a Columbia area specific Slack channel where you can connect with other folks who are learning, and people who are mentors in that area who can say, hey, have you seen this company? Have you talked to this company? This is the language that they use, or this is the technology that they use. And you can start to kind of create for yourself a bit of a pathway. And whatever that pathway looks like, which in development, there are 1 million different options, right? But whatever that pathway for you, whatever that pathway begins to look like, there are likely really good resources just for that. And it may be Pluralsight, it may be something completely different. So we try to help connect our learners with our mentors for this kind of reason, so that you've got real people who can kind of help you navigate that when you're trying to figure that stuff out, because it's super overwhelming. There's so many resources.
Absolutely.
And Scott, yes, SC Codes. Does SC Codes have any kind of reference on good classes, free or low cost, that one can learn from? That's one thing we're actually putting together right now, are kind of area specific, kind of community specific resources about, okay, in your community, here are all the options that we know about in person. And, here's a list of self-taught options too, which of course is important right now, but based on where you are located. So something that we're actively working on. Again, I would say for you, if you're looking at, I would like to know about resources in my community, I would go to the SC Codes community on Slack and ask that question there, so that we can connect you with folks who are local who can really help you with that. And with that, I think we will close up. Y'all have been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And we know it's super valuable, and really appreciate you sharing your stories and your insights with our community.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to see both of you. And my next most popular topic was around kind of a real-time coding breakdown. So maybe you guys can come back and show us some of your code on screen one day.
Okay.
Happy
yeah. We'll see.
Awesome.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. And thanks to all of you who are joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you again next Monday. All right. Bye, guys.
Thanks.